I thought I was moving to a quiet neighborhood. Story 1. The Neighbor Who Never Sleeps. My name is Alex, and this happened when I was a junior at University of Oregon. After a messy breakup my freshman year, I moved into a cheap off-campus apartment complex called Maplewood Court. It was nothing fancy. 3 long brick buildings around a parking lot. Mostly students, a few older folks who'd gone back to school later in life. But the person who immediately unnerved me was Mrs. Halloway, the woman in apartment to be across the hall. I first noticed her because she never seemed to leave her apartment. Doors open, lights flickering late into the night, yet no noise like normal living, no TV, no music, nothing, just movement. Sometimes, when I left for class, I'd glance down the hallway and see her standing perfectly still in the shadows, staring straight at my door. I assumed she was just lonely. Then the weirdness started. One night, around 11:30 p.m., I was coming home from work, carrying groceries, when I saw her outside my window. She wasn't on the sidewalk. She was crouched on the ledge of the fire escape, her eyes locked on mine. I froze, groceries trembling in my hands. I waved like a normal neighbor, but she didn't blink. Instead, she started humming softly, this low, eerie tune that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Then she vanished. Before I could react, I told my roommate, Brian, about it the next day. He shrugged and said, "Oh, that's just Mrs. Halloway. She's always been a little off. Just ignore her." But ignoring her wasn't going to help when I started hearing scratching on my apartment door late at night. Little thumps that sounded like someone tapping with fingernails. Every time I went to check, the hallway would be empty, the air thick and cold, like someone had just passed by. A week later, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my doormat. No writing, just a single photo of my apartment door, taken from the outside. I didn't know whether to call the police or laugh it off, but I didn't. I tucked it into my desk drawer and tried not to sleep with one eye open. That night, I dreamed I was lying in bed and felt someone breathing over me. I woke up to a shadow standing at the foot of my bed. It wasn't real, I told myself. But every time I saw Mrs. Halloway in the hallway after that, she'd give me this small, knowing smile, like she already owned something I didn't even know I'd lost. I couldn't shake what had happened with Mrs. Halloway that first week. Every little noise in the apartment became terrifying. The scratch on the door last night, I swore it sounded like fingernails dragging slowly, almost deliberately, from top to bottom. Brian kept laughing it off, saying I was imagining things. But I knew IWASN single quotes D. Then one night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, soft, deliberate, slow. I froze, my heart hammering. They weren't just moving past my door. They stopped right outside, just waiting. I peeked through the peephole, and nothing, just the empty, dimly lit hallway. But the footsteps didn't stop. They started again, moving back toward the stairs. Slow, careful, but always within earshot. I started sleeping with my baseball bat under the pillow. Every time I dozed off, I kept thinking I saw her reflection in the window across from my bed, her face pale, eyes wide, staring. The next evening, I came home to find the hallway door of 2B wide open, light spilling out. Usually it was dark, quiet, but now I could hear the faintest tapping, almost like someone was writing or drawing on the wall with fingernails. I thought about knocking, calling the cops, but my gut screamed not to. Curiosity got the better of me. I edged closer, pretending I was just checking the mail. The tapping stopped. The air felt icy, heavy. I swear I saw her silhouette move across the room, but when I looked directly, she vanished. And then it got worse. A week later, I came home to find my apartment key missing. Brian swore he hadn't touched it. I tore the apartment apart. Nothing. I even checked under the couch cushions, inside the fridge, even the bathroom. Gone. And that night, I heard its soft breathing outside my bedroom door. Not my own, not Brian's. Something was there, just waiting. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake, watching the door, listening to the faintest creaks of the building settling, and the almost imperceptible sound of her humming. Again, that same low, eerie tune. I didn't know if she had entered, or was just standing outside, but I couldn't stop shaking by the end of the week. I knew one thing: Mrs. Halloway wasn't just weird, she was obsessed, and somehow, she knew exactly when I was alone. I thought I could handle it. I told myself it was just paranoia, stress from classes and work, but that night proved me wrong. Around midnight, I heard a faint scratching again, this time coming from my bedroom window. At first I thought it was a branch brushing against the glass. Then I saw it. Two pale eyes, reflecting the streetlight, staring straight at me. Mrs. Halloway. She wasn't on the fire escape this time. She was crouched on the roof of the building across from mine, barely visible in the shadows, but perfectly framed in my window. I froze. My breath caught. I wanted to scream, run, call the cops, anything, but my body refused to move. And then, she raised her hand, slowly, deliberately, pointing at me, not waving, pointing. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but then I found another photo under my door. This one was taken from inside my bedroom. The angle, the lighting, it had to have been taken while I was asleep. My window wide open. I hadn't moved. My bed was untouched, but the photo was there. I told Brian. His response: "Alex, you're acting crazy. Maybe you should take a break from the apartment." I laughed it off, but I didn't sleep that night either. Every creak, every thump, every whisper of wind made me jump, and that humming, it followed me everywhere. By the fourth night, I started noticing little things missing from my apartment. A pen here, a notebook there, nothing valuable, just items that only I would care about. And she never left fingerprints, never touched a thing I could see. Then came the sound that made my stomach drop, the soft click of my bedroom door handle turning, slowly, just once. My door was locked. I hadn't left it open. I grabbed my bat. I crept toward the door. Nothing. Silence. Heart pounding. I checked the peephole. Empty hallway. But I didn't breathe easy. Something had been there. Something had been waiting. And that's when I realized. She didn't need to touch anything to terrify me. She just needed me to know she was always watching. Always. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, sitting on my bed, bat in hand, eyes glued to the bedroom door. Every shadow in the hallway felt alive. Every floorboard creak sounded deliberate. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted, but I couldn't let myself close my eyes. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound. Not outside, not above, but coming from my own closet. My heart stopped. The closet was locked, and I had never heard it creak like that before. I grabbed the bat, took a deep breath, and slowly turned the knob. The door rattled. Something shifted inside. My vision blurred with fear, but I forced myself forward, and then I saw her, Mrs. Halloway, crouched in the darkness, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had one of my notebooks in her hands, the pages covered in scribbles I didn't recognize, and she was muttering something under her breath, a low, unintelligible chant. When she noticed me, she didn't scream or run. She just looked up at me, that same blank, terrifying expression, and smiled. I froze. My body betrayed me. She rose slowly, holding the notebook out like some offering, her hands trembling, but there was a knife tucked under her sleeve. My stomach dropped. I shouted. I lunged. I didn't know if I was trying to scare her off or save my own life. She hissed, lunging at me with the knife. I swung the bat instinctively, hitting her arm, and the knife clattered across the floor. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry out. She just stared, and that stare. It felt like she could see every fear I'd ever had, every secret thought. I'd tried to hide. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, and she didn't follow. She just crouched again, rocking slightly, muttering that same chant. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, bat still in hand, gasping in the cold night air. The cops didn't believe me at first. "You saw her in your closet?" they asked. I nodded, trembling. "She's known to be eccentric, but she hasn't harmed anyone before," one officer said. I left shaking, but I knew that wasn't true. She had wanted to. She had tried, and I knew this was just the beginning. After that night, I couldn't stay in the apartment alone. I begged Brian to stay with me, but he had his own schedule, and eventually, I was left to face it alone again. I changed the locks, triple-checked my windows, even set up a small camera, aimed at the hallway, but nothing felt safe. The strangest thing, Mrs. Holloway didn't always appear immediately. Sometimes, days would pass without a sound, and I'd start to believe I was imagining everything. And then, it would start. Again. The soft humming, the scratches, the shadows moving just out of the corner of my eye. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I heard it again, the soft drag of footsteps on the carpet outside my door. But this time, it stopped at my threshold. I could feel her presence there. My bat was in my hands, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely lift it. Then I heard a whisper. Just a single word, barely audible, but it made my blood run cold. "Alex." I froze. I hadn't told anyone my name except Brian, and she said it like she knew me better than I knew myself. I decided I couldn't wait for her to strike next. I had to act. I started researching her history, digging through old neighborhood records, online posts, anything I could find. What I discovered was chilling. Mrs. Holloway had been living in Maplewood Court for over 15 years. Tenants came and went, but she always stayed. Complaints about noises, strange behavior, people claiming to see her outside their windows at all hours. None of it ever resulted in eviction. No one knew her family. No one knew her past. And then I found a police report from over a decade ago. A young woman had been found in her apartment, bound and unconscious. The report was vague, but it mentioned Mrs. Holloway's involvement and that she had been released due to mental health considerations. I felt sick. My apartment, my sanctuary, had become a cage. I realized she didn't just want to scare me. She wanted control. She wanted to know everything about me, every movement, every thought. That night, I set up every precaution I could think of. Locks, cameras, even a pepper spray can in my hand. But when I laid down, trying to calm myself, I heard it. That soft humming again, closer than ever, right outside my bedroom door. And I knew, deep down, there was no escaping her. Not tonight. Not ever. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. The humming, the scratching, the feeling of her eyes burning into my back, it was too much. I decided I had to confront her. I grabbed my bat, my pepper spray, and crept out into the hallway. The apartment was silent, eerily so. The faint glow from the exit sign cast long shadows. My apartment door was closed, but I could feel her presence nearby. Then I saw her at the end of the hallway, standing perfectly still, just staring. Her eyes, God, her eyes, black, endless, like she could reach into my soul and pull out my worst fears. I stepped closer. "Mrs. Holloway," I whispered. My voice shook. She tilted her head slowly, like a predator considering its prey. She didn't speak. She just smiled, that same blank, terrifying smile. And then she moved. Fast. Faster than I thought possible. She lunged toward me with a glint of metal in her hand. I barely had time to swing the bat. It connected with her shoulder, and the knife clattered to the floor. But she didn't scream. She didn't even slow down. She just kept coming. I backed into my apartment, slamming the door shut and locking it. My heart was hammering. My hands were shaking. And through the thin door, I could hear her humming again. Louder, closer. I ran to the closet, throwing open the cameras I'd set up. The feed showed her standing in the hallway, staring straight at my door. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. I realized then, she didn't need to enter the apartment. She could terrify me from outside, from a distance, without even touching me. I spent the rest of the night on the floor, bat in hand, listening to the soft hum and counting every second until dawn. When the first rays of sunlight hit my window, she was gone, but I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. After that night, I couldn't stay in the apartment alone anymore. I started spending nights at friends' places, but every time I returned, the feeling didn't go away. That humming, those eyes, the way she seemed to know my every move, it was unbearable. Then I noticed something strange about the walls of my apartment. Small scratches, almost like faint claw marks, along the baseboards. At first I thought it was just the building settling, but then I found a tiny hole near the floor, just big enough to peek through. Curiosity mixed with terror I couldn't resist. I crouched down, careful not to make a sound, and looked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. A narrow crawl space ran between my apartment and Mrs. Holloway's, and inside, hidden in the shadows, I could see her. Not walking, not standing, was lying flat, watching, recording. I realized then that every movement I had thought was random, every shadow, every sound. She had been watching me from inside the walls all along. I stumbled back, almost screaming. How had she even built this? How long had she been doing this? My stomach churned as I realized she wasn't just obsessed, she had prepared for this. She had been living in my apartment complex for years, watching tenants, collecting photos, learning habits, and now, me. I thought about calling the police again, but what could I say? There's a woman hiding inside my walls, watching me. It would sound insane, and she knew I was discovering the truth. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, bat in hand, staring at the walls. Every small creak, every thump, every whisper of wind sounded like her moving closer. I knew she could strike at any moment, and, deep down, I realized something worse. She wasn't going to stop. Not ever. I couldn't avoid it any longer. The scratches, the whispers, the soft humming, it had to end. That night, I armed myself with everything I had. My bat, a hammer, pepper spray, even a flashlight. I had decided I was going to find her, confront her, and end this nightmare once and for all. As I crept down the hallway, the lights flickered. I heard her humming, soft, low, almost soothing, but underneath it, there was malice. It chilled me to the bone. I reached the end of the hall, near her door, and froze. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it slowly, darkness inside. Then a creak behind me, my own apartment door. I spun around. Nothing. My heart was racing. Then I noticed it. A shadow moving across the room, not from the hallway, not from the door, but from inside the wall itself. She emerged, her eyes wide, her expression blank, and in her hand, one of my notebooks, now filled with sketches of me sleeping, sitting, even walking around the apartment. She whispered my name again, Alex. I raised the bat, trembling. She didn't flinch. Then, without warning, she lunged. I swung. Missed. She was fast and naturally fast. I stumbled backward into a pile of boxes, knocking over a lamp. The crash startled her, and she paused. That pause saved me. I grabbed the pepper spray and sprayed it directly into her face. She screamed a sound I will never forget. A raw, chilling wail and stumbled back, giving me just enough time to run. I ran out of her apartment, down the stairwell, heart hammering, screaming for help. Brian, who had come over after I texted him in a panic, caught me at the bottom. We tried calling the cops, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. No signs of forced entry, no trace, just a dark, empty apartment, and a silence so complete, it made my skin crawl. Even now, thinking about that night, I can still hear her humming, still see those eyes, endless and black, and I know she's still there, somewhere in Maplewood Court, watching, waiting. I thought I was safe after that night. I changed apartments within the same complex, thinking distance would protect me. I even installed new locks, alarms, and cameras. I told myself she couldn't possibly follow me into a different building, but she did. It started small at teams, moved around my new apartment. My keys left in different places. My notebooks opened, scribbled in. At first I blamed myself, thinking I was losing my mind. Then the humming started again. Soft, low, unmistakable. She was here, watching, waiting. I thought I was safe after that night. I changed apartments within the same complex, thinking distance would protect me. I even installed new locks, alarms, and cameras. I told myself she couldn't possibly follow me into a different building, but she did it. Started small, items moved around my new apartment, my keys left in different places, my notebooks opened, scribbled in. At first, I blamed myself, thinking I was losing my mind. Then the humming started again, soft, low, unmistakable. She was here, watching, waiting. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching on my window. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and shined my flashlight. There she was, on the fire escape again, eyes black and endless, staring directly at me. I screamed. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. Just smiled that same blank smile. I realized then that it didn't matter how far I ran. She had been planning this for years. She knew the layout of the entire complex, every stairwell, every exit. Every time I thought I was safe, she proved me wrong. I tried the police again. This time, they took my statements seriously, but even with their involvement, they never found her. My neighbors' people I had trusted claimed they hadn't seen anything unusual. It was like she existed in a parallel shadow world, only visible. To me, I started sleeping with lights on, doors locked, bat under my pillow, cameras everywhere. But no matter what I did, I felt her eyes on me, waiting for the next night, waiting for the next mistake. And I knew deep down, this was far from over. Months passed, and I tried to convince myself I was finally safe. I even started bringing my life back to some normalcy, classes, work, friends. But every night, that humming would creep back into my dreams. That same low, soft, chilling melody that reminded me I was never alone. Then, one evening, I returned from work to find a note, slipped under my apartment door. No words, just a small, cracked photograph of me, sleeping in my bed. My hands trembled as I picked it up. She had been inside. Again, I called the police immediately. They searched my apartment top to bottom. Nothing, no fingerprints, no evidence, nothing except the note and the photograph. I realized something terrifying. Mrs. Holloway didn't need to be caught to win. She didn't need to harm me physically. She only needed to exist in the shadows, to make me feel watched, vulnerable, powerless. She had taken my peace, my sleep, my sense of safety. I moved again, to a different city, hoping distance would finally save me. But even now, years later, I can't sleep without checking every corner of the room. Every floorboard, every closet, every hallway feels alive. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear it. Soft, low humming, like someone just behind the wall. I know I'll never be free, and I know she's still out there, waiting for the next person to watch, the next person to terrify, the next victim. I just pray it's not me again. Story 2. The Stalker across the street. My name is Jenna, and this happened last summer in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. I had just moved into my first house after graduating, excited for a fresh start. The neighborhood was perfect, tree-lined streets, families with kids, and everyone seemed friendly. Then he moved in, His name was Ryan. Young, maybe late 20s, with an expensive sports car and a house that looked brand new. He waved at me the first day I was unpacking, and I waved back politely, thinking he was just a friendly neighbor. But there was something off, something I couldn't put my finger on. At first it was small things. I'd be in my backyard, and I'd see him standing in his driveway, staring. Not waving, not talking, just staring. I thought maybe he was checking out the landscaping, but his gaze followed me no matter where I went. Then it escalated. One evening, I noticed the same girl coming over to his house. Blonde, 20-something, always wearing sunglasses even at night. She didn't talk to me or anyone else, just went inside and stayed for hours. At first, I assumed she was his girlfriend, but something about the way she moved furtive, tense, gave me chills. It wasn't long before I started noticing strange things around my own house. The mailbox opened when I hadn't touched it. Packages slightly shifted. And once, I found a small piece of paper on my doorstep, a crude drawing of my house, with a tiny stick figure standing in my yard. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was kids playing a prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept glancing out my window, and there he was, Ryan, standing perfectly still in his driveway, staring at me. And then I saw her, blonde girl, hiding behind a tree near the edge of his yard, watching as well. I realized then that I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied. Every movement I made, every moment I thought I was alone, they were both observing, waiting for something. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a coincidence. Maybe Ryan had just been watering his lawn. Maybe the girl was waiting for someone else. But that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, my sense of unease returned with a vengeance. I was sitting in my living room, unpacking boxers, when I noticed movement across the street. Ryan was outside again, this time leaning casually against his car, but he wasn't alone. The girl, Ellie, was crouched behind a bush, peering directly at my windows. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend, warning her about what I was seeing. She laughed it off. "Jenna, you're overreacting. Maybe they're just friendly." But I knew better. I had been alone in my apartment for just a few hours, and I could feel their eyes on me, tracking my every move. Over the next few days, it got worse. I started noticing things missing from my porch. Small tools, a notebook, even a pair of gloves. Every time I left a window open to get air, Ryan or Ellie seemed to appear in my peripheral vision, sometimes standing perfectly still, sometimes crouched behind the hedges, watching. Then came the first real scare. I was taking out the trash late one night when I noticed the girl standing at the edge of my driveway. She smiled at me, a blank, unsettling smile, and then she vanished into the shadows. My heart raced, but when I turned toward Ryan's house, he was gone. That's when I realized they were coordinating. They were both watching me, and I had no idea how long they had been doing it. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but the sense of dread crawling up my spine told me otherwise. I started sleeping with the lights on, doors locked, phone in hand. Every noise outside, an engine starting, a car door slamming, even the wind rustling the trees made me jump. I knew it wasn't over, and I had a feeling, deep down, that what they were planning was only beginning. It was just past midnight when I heard the first crash. I jolted awake, heart hammering, and froze. The sound came from my backyard. I peeked through the blinds and saw her, Ellie, crouched near my garden, rifling through my trash cans. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. Then, from the shadows of the street, Ryan appeared, leaning against his car. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just watched me, calm and silent, as if daring me to make a move. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering frantic words into the receiver. By the time the operator answered, they were gone, just like No footprints, no sign anyone had been there, except the trash scattered across my yard. The next morning, I noticed something terrifying. On my front porch was a single white envelope. Inside, a photo of me sleeping, taken through my own bedroom window. The handwriting on the back simply said, "We know." I spent the entire day locked inside, blinds drawn, doors double-checked. But the paranoia was only getting worse. Every time I glanced out the window, I thought I saw the Melly crouched behind a tree, Ryan in the driveway, just staring. That night, I decided I couldn't just hide anymore. I had to find out what they wanted and how far they were willing to go. I set up cameras outside, took photos of every window, and even motion sensors on my porch. By 2 a.m., the first alert went off. Motion on the north side of my house. I looked through the camera feed. Ryan was there, crouched behind a bush, holding a small device that looked like a phone or tablet. Ellie was moving silently around the back, checking locks, peering into windows. I realized then it wasn't just stalking anymore. They were studying me, mapping my movements, learning my routines, and preparing for something. Something I didn't yet understand, and I knew one thing for certain. If I didn't act soon, this nightmare would escalate, and there might be no turning back. I couldn't wait any longer. Every night, every glance out the window, every creak of the floorboards made me feel like I was already trapped in their game. I had to confront them, or at least catch them in the act. I stayed up late, pretending to sleep, watching the cameras I'd installed outside. Around 1:15 a.m., the first motion sensor went off. Ryan was there, crouched near the corner of his garage, and Ellie was moving silently along my fence line. I grabbed a flashlight and a heavy metal rod from my closet and quietly slipped out the front door. My heart hammered in my chest, and every step on the gravel felt deafening. I tried to keep my breathing calm, but adrenaline was coursing through me like fire. Ellie froze the moment she saw me. Her blank smile stretched wider than any human expression should, and for a second, I thought she might just laugh. Then Ryan stepped out from the shadows. He wasn't smiling. He looked calculating. "You shouldn't be out here," he said softly. Not threatening, not angry, just calm. But the tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. I raised the rod. "Stay back." My voice shook. They didn't move. They just watched me, like a predator observing prey. Then Ellie started walking toward me, slowly, deliberately. My hands trembled. I swung the rod toward her, but she didn't flinch. She just tilted her head, that same unnerving smile on her face. Ryan stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "She's not supposed to know yet," he said, almost to himself. My stomach dropped. Something about that sentence made me realize this wasn't random stalking. This was planned. Every glance, every photograph, every movement, they had been preparing for something specific, something I couldn't yet see. Before I could react further, a sudden sound came from behind me, the front gate, the wind, or had they set another trap? I spun around, heart racing, and saw shadows moving along the edge of my porch. More of them. I didn't know. I only knew one thing. I was in the middle of something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I didn't wait to find out what else they had planned. I spun on my heel and ran back toward my front door, heart hammering in my chest, like it wanted to escape before I did. The metal rod in my hand felt useless against the calm, calculated presence of Ryan and that blank, eerie smile of Ellie. I slammed the door behind me, locking it as fast as I could, but the pounding in my chest didn't stop. I could hear faint tapping at the windows, almost rhythmic, almost taunting. They weren't just stalking me, they were playing a game, and I was the target. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering every detail, my voice shaking so badly I could barely hold it together. "They're outside, across the street. They know where I am. Please, hurry." The operator assured me officers were on the way, but as I looked through the peephole, I realized I wasn't safe. Ryan was standing perfectly still in his driveway, staring up at my window. Ellie had disappeared, but I could feel her presence. Somewhere, she was moving, silently, waiting for the right moment. Minutes felt like hours. Then, headlights pierced the darkness. Police cars. Ryan's expression didn't change. He didn't run. He just stared. The officers arrived and canvassed the street. But there was no sign of Ellie, and when they knocked on Ryan's door, it was empty. Completely empty. After they left, I sat on the floor, shaking, bat still in my hands. I realized something terrifying. Ryan and Ellie had planned this. They knew the police would come. They wanted me to see them, to feel powerless. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my room seemed alive. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the rustle of leaves outside felt like a threat. And I knew, deep down, that this nightmare was far from over. I had survived the first encounter, but Ryan and Ellie weren't just my neighbors anymore. They were hunters, and I was their prey. The next morning, I couldn't stay inside anymore. I had to figure out what they wanted, why they were doing this. I grabbed my backpack, my phone, and a small flashlight, and cautiously stepped outside. The street was quiet, almost too quiet, but then I noticed tiny footprints in the dirt along my fence. Fresh. I followed them, careful not to make a sound. They led toward Ryan's house. I crouched behind a bush near the driveway and peeked through the side window. Inside, I saw Ellie and Ryan, or, at least, two figures sifting through a filing cabinet, papers scattered everywhere. But what caught my attention were the photographs, hundreds of them, pictures of me. Every movement I had made since moving in. My morning coffee, my mailbox, even me sleeping by the window a few nights ago. I gasped quietly. They weren't just stalking me. They were documenting me, mapping my life, obsessed with control. Then, I noticed something else, small notes, scribbled in a childish hand. Locations, times, reminders. She sleeps now. Front door unlocked. Kitchen light off at 10:12. I stumbled back, almost dropping my flashlight. This wasn't just stalking. They were planning. Planning for something that I couldn't even imagine. My stomach churned, and panic gripped me. I knew I had to warn someone. I ran back to my house and called the police again, this time insisting they come and investigate Ryan's house thoroughly. But when they arrived, the house was empty. Not a single clue remained inside. Only the faint feeling of being watched, the faint echo of Ellie's blank, unnerving smile. By the time I locked my door, I realized something terrifying. They weren't going to stop. They didn't need to be physically present. They had already studied me, learned my habits, and were always one step ahead. And I knew, without a doubt, that the next time I saw them, it would be far worse. It was late, maybe 2:30 a.m., when I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. My heart slammed in my chest. I froze, listening. Then came the unmistakable sound of a figure moving along the side of my house. I grabbed my flashlight and a kitchen knife and crept to the window. Outside, Ryan was standing in the shadows, calm as ever, watching. Ellie emerged from behind a tree, smiling that same blank, terrifying smile. I backed away from the window, trying to think. I had to do something, but my options were limited. If I screamed, they could vanish before the cops arrived. If I stayed, they could break in. Suddenly, the back door handle rattled. I swung the knife, heart hammering. Ellie was trying to get in. Ryan didn't move. He just stood there, studying me. I bolted out the front door, screaming for help. I ran across the street, trying to reach a neighbor's house. My flashlight illuminated Ellie chasing me, silently, impossibly fast. Ryan followed at a distance. Calm, deliberate. Almost enjoying my panic, I reached the neighbor's porch and pounded on the door. The lights flicked on, and the neighbors finally called the police. I looked back. Ryan and Ellie were gone, melting into the shadows like ghosts. But I knew they hadn't left for good. That night, shaking and terrified, I realized something I couldn't deny. They weren't just stalking me for sport. They had planned this. Every move, every scare, every note, it was all part of a larger game, and I was still in it. The next day, I couldn't stay paralyzed by fear anymore. I had to understand them, or at least find a way to stop them. I spent hours going through the photos and notes I had recovered from the camera footage outside my house, and then I noticed something chilling. Patterns, dates, times, even the angles of the photos. They weren't random. I cross-referenced the dates with local events and deliveries. That's when it hit me. Ryan and Ellie weren't just obsessed with me. They had been studying the entire neighborhood. Every new family, every isolated resident, every single moment someone was vulnerable. And somehow, I had caught their attention first. That night, I decided to take action. I set up multiple cameras, motion sensors, and even a tripwire near my back door. I had no intention of hiding. I wanted to lure them, catch them in the act, and finally prove to the police that I wasn't imagining this. Around 1:45 a.m., the motion sensors went off. Through the night vision camera feed, I saw Ellie moving cautiously along the fence, and Ryan crouched behind a tree, almost like a predator waiting to strike. My heart pounded, but I stayed calm. I wasn't running this time. I whispered into my phone, recording everything, and slowly opened the back door. They froze the moment they noticed me, but the moment was brief. Ellie lunged forward, and Ryan followed. I shouted, swinging a metal rod I had hidden near the door. The sound of metal clashing against her wrist made her stumble backward. Ryan hesitated. Something about the way I had prepared myself made him pause. For the first time, I realized something crucial. They weren't invincible. They could be scared. They could be stopped. But I also realized something worse. What I didn't know about them might be far more terrifying than anything I had seen so far. The air was thick with tension. I could see them through the night vision cameras, their eyes reflecting the faint red glow of the sensors. Ellie crouched behind the fence, tense and ready to strike. Ryan stood near the driveway, calm but alert, like a predator calculating his next move. I knew I couldn't wait for them to make the first move. I had to force the confrontation, but carefully. I grabbed a flashlight and my bat, slowly opening the back door. I stepped onto the porch, making deliberate noise, letting them know I was awake, aware, and prepared. Ellie sprang forward, faster than I expected. I swung the bat, connecting with her arm. She yelped, but didn't retreat. Her blank smile remained, terrifying in its intensity. Ryan took a step forward, and I realized just how close I was to danger. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run, but I stood my ground. "You've been watching me," I shouted. "I see you. I know what you're doing. This ends tonight." Ryan didn't respond, just tilted his head, studying me. Then, something unexpected happened. Ellie hesitated, almost as if she had never encountered resistance before. Ryan's eyes flickered not with anger, but surprise. In that split second, I lunged forward, swinging the bat with everything I had. Ellie stumbled, and Ryan's momentum faltered. I didn't wait. I ran past them, out onto the street, shouting for help. Within minutes, neighbors' lights flicked on, and sirens blared in the distance. Ryan and Ellie disappeared into the shadows, retreating, but I had caught enough on my cameras and phone to finally give the police proof of their stalking, their obsession, and their dangerous behavior. For the first time in weeks, I breathed. I wasn't free yet, not completely, but I had taken the first step to reclaim my life, and for the first time, I realized they were human, vulnerable, not invincible. But the image of their blank, unblinking eyes haunted me, and deep down, I knew some part of them would always be out there, waiting, watching. Weeks passed after the confrontation. Ryan and Ellie had vanished from the neighborhood, and I tried desperately to convince myself that they were gone for good. Police reviewed my footage, and finally, they seemed to take my fears seriously. I changed locks, installed stronger security, and even considered moving again. But the paranoia never left me. Every shadow at night, every rustle outside, made my chest tighten. I would sometimes catch glimpses of a figure in the distance, motionless, watching. Sometimes it was Ryan's tall, calm silhouette. Sometimes a flash of blonde hair that looked like Ellie's. Then came the small signs. Notes slipped under my door. Photos of me taken from angles I was certain no one could see. A faint humming outside, just beyond the range of my security cameras. It was then I understood the terrifying truth. Ryan and Ellie didn't need to be here physically. Their obsession, their planning, their meticulous stalking had imprinted a fear in me that they didn't have to maintain in person. They had already won, in a sense. They had taken my peace, my sense of safety, and a part of my life I would never get back. Even now, years later, I live with the constant awareness that I'm being watched. I sleep with lights on, locks, and rarely leave my blinds open. Every new neighbor, every unfamiliar car, sends a chill down my spine, and deep down, I know this. One day they might come back, and when they do, I won't know if I can survive it. Story 3. The house next door. My name is Marcus, and I moved to a small town just outside Austin, Texas, last year. I had just ended a toxic relationship and wanted a fresh start. The neighborhood seemed quiet and safe, big lawns, family homes, and the occasional dog barking in the distance. Then I noticed the house next door. It was massive, almost too big for the neighborhood. Dark wood, high fences, windows blacked out with heavy curtains. For weeks, I didn't see anyone go in or out. No cars, no lights, just stillness. Curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon, I walked up to the front yard to introduce myself. The door swung open, and a young man in his early 30s answered. He smiled, but there was something off, a stiffness in his posture, a gaze that lingered too long. "Hey, I'm Marcus," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded. "I'm Damon, nice to meet you." We exchanged the usual neighbor pleasantries, and I noticed something strange. The house was enormous, yet he claimed to live there alone. No roommate, no family, just him. For the next few weeks, I tried to ignore it, but odd things kept happening. At night, I'd see lights flickering inside the house even, though the curtains were always closed. Sometimes, I'd hear faint sounds, music, laughter, voices, though I never saw anyone else. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a strange sound, the garage door creaking open. I peeked through my window and froze. Damon's house was fully lit, and I could see figures moving inside, shadows against the curtains, but no one coming outside. I knew then that something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was, but I had the sinking feeling that the house next door wasn't just empty, it was hiding something, or someone. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but the unease didn't go away. The house next door was always dark during the day, but at night, it felt alive. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down the times lights flickered, noises I heard, and any unusual comings and goings. It wasn't long before I noticed a pattern. Every Wednesday, around 2 a.m., the lights would go on, and shadows would move in the windows. Curiosity won over caution. One Wednesday night, I quietly stepped onto my porch, peering through the side fence. Inside, I could see Damon, or someone who looked exactly like him, moving furniture, arranging objects in strange, meticulous patterns. And then I noticed the first truly terrifying thing. The figures weren't alone. Behind one of the curtained windows, I saw several others, older men, wearing gloves and masks, moving silently. I couldn't make out faces, but their movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. My heart pounded. I had to look closer. I grabbed my binoculars and adjusted my focus, and what I saw made my stomach drop. On the floor in the center of the room was a small, intricate set of candles, papers with symbols, and dozens of photographs of my house, my front porch, my windows. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the binoculars. They weren't just strange, they were stalking me. I realized then that Damon's enormous, seemingly empty house had been a hideout for something much darker, and I had unknowingly caught their attention. I ran inside and locked all my doors and windows, my hands shaking. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak, every rustle outside felt like someone was watching me, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next day, I couldn't shake the image of those photos and symbols. I knew I had to gather proof, but I had to be careful. If Damon or his accomplices caught me, I had no idea what they might do. I borrowed a small, inconspicuous camera from a friend and set it up on my porch, pointing toward Damon's house. I stayed inside, pretending to work, watching the screen. Around 2 a.m., just like before, the lights flicked on. Shadows moved across the windows, and I could see figures carrying objects, boxes, bags, maybe more photos. Then something terrifying happened. One of the figures stopped abruptly, standing perfectly still near the curtains. I held my breath, and then they were looking directly at me. Or at least, it felt like they were. Panic surged through me. I ducked down, but my eyes stayed glued to the monitor. Damon appeared at the front door, slowly opening it, scanning the street. I froze. His gaze swept past my house sore. Maybe he knew I was watching. Minutes felt like hours. He didn't move further outside, but I could feel it. He had seen me. The sense of being hunted wasn't imagination anymore. They knew I was onto them. By the time he disappeared back inside, I was shaking uncontrollably. The camera footage had captured something else too. Just for a second, I saw Ellie, a young woman, pale, with an unnerving smile, standing behind Damon, watching me silently. I realized then that I wasn't just a witness, I was a target, and whatever Damon and his group were planning, they were planning it for me. I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, listening for every sound outside. Every shadow, every movement, every whisper of wind made me jump. I knew one thing for certain: they weren't done with me yet. It was around 2:15 a.m. when I finally saw them move again. Damon's house was lit up, shadows flitting across the curtains. I couldn't wait any longer, had to know what they were doing inside, and I had to act. I grabbed a flashlight and my baseball bat, creeping along my side yard, toward a small gap in the fence that gave me a partial view into the backyard. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. Ellie appeared first, stepping lightly across the lawn, her blank smile visible even in the dark. Damon followed, methodical, carrying a large black bag. My stomach sank. Whatever they had planned, it wasn't good. I stepped on a twig. Snapped at. Ellie froze instantly, her head tilting in my direction. Damon stopped too, scanning the shadows. My blood ran cold. They knew I was there. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my bat. Ellie started moving toward me, unnervingly silent. Damon followed, but he didn't run, he walked, deliberate, like he was in control, like he had done this 1,000 times before. I raised a bat and shouted, "Stay back." My voice cracked. Ellie hesitated, just enough for me to realize they had never been confronted like this before. Damon's eyes flickered surprise, irritation. I couldn't tell. I ran back toward my porch, heart hammering, and locked the door behind me. They stopped at the edge of the yard, staring at me. The street was silent, except for my own ragged breathing. That night, I realized something chilling. Damon and Ellie weren't just dangerous, they were patient. They had planned every move, studied me, and now that I knew, I had just entered their game. And somehow, I knew, this was only the beginning. The next day, I realized I couldn't just hide and wait. If I wanted to stop them, I needed proof. Solid proof. Something the police couldn't ignore. I bought small cameras, motion sensors, and a digital recorder, hiding them in the trees and along the fence line. My hands shook the entire time, but I forced myself to stay calm. Tonight, I would catch them. Around 2 a.m., the sensors went off. I peeked through my window and froze. Damon's house was alive with movement, figures moving swiftly, shadows flitting across the room. One counted 4, maybe 5. Ellie appeared first, stepping out of the shadows, silent and precise, her blank smile chilling. Damon carried a large, heavy bag, and I noticed something new. It wasn't just photos or papers this time. He placed the bag on a table and began carefully arranging objects I couldn't identify. Candles, strange symbols drawn in chalk, and photographs, hundreds of them. But this time, they weren't just of me. They were of other neighbors, 2 people I had seen in the neighborhood, all captured while they slept, ate, or went about their lives. My stomach turned. This wasn't just stalking, it was obsession, ritual, and planning. And somehow, they knew I was watching. Ellie glanced toward the fence, tilting her head, that same unnerving smile. Damon paused, looking directly in my direction. I ducked down, heart racing. They were aware. They weren't just doing this for fun anymore. They were escalating, and I was in the middle of it. I realized then that tonight wasn't just about gathering evidence. Tonight was a warning, and if I made one wrong move, I didn't even want to imagine what would happen next. It was past 2 a.m. when I finally saw them move again. Damon's house glowed through the night, shadows flitting across the curtains. My heart hammered as I grabbed a flashlight and my bat. Stepping cautiously toward the side yard, Ellie appeared first. Stepping lightly across the lawn, her blank smile chilling in the moonlight. Damon followed, methodical, carrying a heavy black bag. My stomach sank. Whatever they were planning this time, it wasn't harmless. I froze when Damon stopped and looked directly at me, his eyes sharp, calculating. Ellie tilted her head, watching. Silent. I realized then, they weren't just aware of me. They had been expecting me. I yelled, "Stay back." My voice cracked, but it was enough to make Ellie hesitate. Damon's expression didn't change, but he took a slow step forward. Panic surged through me, but I remembered the cameras I had set up earlier. I raised my flashlight, illuminating the yard and recording everything. Ellie's eyes narrowed. Damon's movements slowed. For the first time, I realized they weren't invincible. They were human, vulnerable. I could fight back. Then Ellie lunged. I swung the bat, connecting with her shoulder, and she stumbled. Damon hesitated, glancing at her. That's when I ran through the yard, out onto the street, shouting for help. Lights flicked on in the neighborhood, sirens wailed in the distance, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a moment of relief. Damon and Ellie melted into the shadows, but I knew they weren't gone. Not really. And I knew one more thing. The next time we met, it would be far more dangerous. After the terrifying confrontation, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow outside made my heart race. I knew I had to understand what Damon and Ellie were. Really after, I spent the next day reviewing every piece of footage from my cameras and motion sensors. Then I saw a series of photos Damon had dropped during the last encounter. Not just me, not just neighbors, but specific items, keys, mail, even small valuables left unattended. They weren't just stalking us, they were cataloging vulnerabilities. Each photo, each symbol, each careful note was part of a larger plan. I traced dates, cross-referencing them with deliveries and routines. That's when the nightmare hit. Their plan wasn't just to scare or control. They were preparing for something bigger. A coordinated break-in, targeted thefts, possibly worse. They had mapped the entire street, and I was their test case. I felt my stomach drop. They weren't random. They were organized, methodical, and they had been planning this long before. I moved in. That night, I set up every camera I had and stayed awake, watching the feed. Around 2 a.m., Ellie appeared first, moving carefully across the yard, followed by Damon carrying a large duffel bag. They were setting up, preparing. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I whispered into my recorder, documenting everything. I had the proof. I had the evidence to stop them. And yet, the worst part lingered. Even with proof, I knew confronting them again would be the most dangerous thing I had ever done. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Damon and Ellie were methodical, organized, and dangerous. If I wanted to survive, I had to take control of the situation. I set up every camera, sensor, and motion detector I owned around my property. I even wired a small alarm system that would alert me if anyone crossed the fence. I spent the day preparing, going over every detail I had observed about their patterns. I knew they were meticulous, but I had something they didn't: knowledge. And tonight, I planned to use it against them. Around 2 a.m., I saw them emerge from Damon's house. Ellie moved first, silent as a shadow. Damon followed, carrying a black duffel bag. I stayed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. When they approached my yard, I triggered a loud alarm and bright floodlights. Ellie stumbled back, startled. Damon froze, scanning the area, his expression unreadable, but tense. I stepped forward, bat in hand, and shouted, "It ends tonight." My voice was steady, even though my heart pounded in my chest. Ellie hesitated, tilting her head, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of doubt. Damon's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move aggressively yet. I realized then that I had a chance. I wasn't defenseless. I wasn't prey. And in that instant, I knew the final confrontation had begun. The shadows, the stalking, the rituals, they would all come to a head tonight. The floodlights bathed my yard in harsh white, and I could see every shadow moving inside Damon's house. Ellie appeared first, stepping cautiously, her blank smile chilling in the night. Damon followed, carrying the black duffel bag. I gripped my bat tightly, standing my ground. "It ends here," I shouted. Ellie froze for a moment, tilting her head as if surprised that I wasn't running. Damon's eyes flickered calm, calculating, but there was a hint of hesitation. They had never been challenged like this before. Ellie lunged, and I swung the bat, hitting her shoulder. She stumbled back, letting out a low, unsettling hiss. Damon stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, but I wasn't backing down. I could feel my pulse racing, but I forced myself to stay steady. Suddenly, Ellie darted to the side, disappearing into the shadows. While Damon tried to circle me, I sprinted toward my porch, slamming the door and locking it behind me. The sirens from the street flicked on neighbors, had finally noticed. Damon and Ellie stopped at the yard's edge, staring, their expressions unreadable. I knew I had won, a small victory, but the danger wasn't over. Their plans, their obsession, were far from finished. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. They didn't need to be physically present to haunt me. Their shadow over my life was already permanent. I sank to the floor, shaking, clutching the bat, knowing that tomorrow, or the next night, they might return. But at least now, I was ready. Weeks passed. Damon and Ellie had disappeared, at least physically. The neighborhood returned to its quiet routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow, every whisper of wind, made my skin crawl. I continued reviewing the footage from my cameras. Even though I had caught them, even though the police had evidence now, I couldn't convince myself that it was over. There were gaps, moments when the cameras showed movement outside my house that couldn't be explained. Then the small signs began. A note slipped under my door, a photograph of my mailbox, a soft, deliberate tap on a window late at night. They didn't need to be seen to make their presence felt. I realized the horrifying truth. Damon and Ellie had planned more than I could imagine. The obsession, the rituals, the watching eat, had created something permanent. Their shadow over my life wasn't something I could escape. Even now, years later, I live cautiously. Windows locked, blinds closed, lights on. Every new neighbor, every unfamiliar car, sends a chill down my spine, and deep down, I know the terrifying reality. One day, they may return, and when they do, I won't know if I can survive it, because some shadows never leave, and some predators never forget.